back. Round three, I suppose. Um, so I want to talk about something that is probably the most impactful or relevant thing that I could talk about at this stage of my life. And it's something that once I learned it, I really started to implement it into my learning, my life, my daughter's life. And I don't know, it was such a profound piece of information that I just couldn't believe no one else saw how important this could be. 'Cause I learned this in class, and everyone else, it seemed like it was just another piece of information they had to get for a test. But to me, it confirmed a few things. And also, I just could not believe that just giving out this information for free. And I don't think the people I learned this information with in class realized the importance of the significance of such information. So what is it? Um, in short, protein synthesis. Um, Now, you might not be familiar with what that is, and that's okay. It's understandable. Hopefully, through the process of me explaining things today, I think that you know a little more about the brain and protein synthesis and how all of it works and why it's so important to me to share this now while I have the opportunity. So, I'm big on learning and memory. And it's acquiring information in a manner in which it is more likely to stick, right? And the mechanism that I'm about to talk about it has worked for me. I'm sure if you can find to appreciate or can come to appreciate my words, or I think it will be relevant to you as well. So when we have an experience, or when we read something, or we hear something, or see, there's a certain process within us begins, right? And it's really just the physiology of learning and memory, like what happens mechanistically when we do try to acquire new information. Okay, um, typically it's all about synaptic connections. The neurons, which are brain cells, they communicate signals to one another all the time. Okay, and so to keep it simple, when we hear something or we acquire a new piece of information, let's just say it requires 3 synaptic connections for us to remember it for the next, I don't know, 15 to 20 seconds. 3 connections, 15, 20 seconds. It's not a lot of connections. It's not a lot of time, but the mechanism um, is as follows. So when signals are sent, all right, the hippocampus, let's start here. The hippocampus is thought to be the center or the crux of learning and memory in our brains. Um, it's the area of the brain that is thought to be where all the magic happens. Not all of it, just most of it. So when we learn memories, or we start to try and remember things, or we have experiences, what happens is, I say, so the base, the resting millivoltage of a neuron is negative 70 millivolts. At rest, its baseline carries a negative charge. When we try to learn new memories, we start forming new memories or have new experiences, certain things happen. Glutamate, which is thought to be the main neurotransmitter of learning and memory, is a ligand, something that binds to something else. Glutamate is a type of ligand. It binds to things. In this particular example, it binds to receptors. The receptors are AMPA receptors, AMPA. When glutamate binds to these receptors, the AMPA receptor channel opens up, which allows sodium to enter the cell. Now, sodium carries a positive charge. Now, when you introduce a positive charge to a net negative neuron, negative 70 millivolts, you make it less negative by introducing a positive element. You are depolarizing it. If you were to add a negative element to a net negative neuron, you would hyperpolarize it. You will make it more negative. So the influx of sodium makes the net neutral negative 70 millivolt neuron more positive. Depolarization. Okay? Now, that's just the beginning. The next phase, now once glutamate binds to enough AMPA receptors to open the channel for sodium to come in, when the cell becomes sufficiently depolarized, meaning more positive to a certain threshold, once a certain positivity threshold is reached, another type of receptor called the NMDA receptor, which is also a binding site for glutamate, has a magnesium blocker in its channel. Right, so the AMPA receptor has a channel that opens and lets in sodium. The NMDA receptor has a channel as well, but doesn't let in sodium. Before it can let in anything, the net negative neuron has to be sufficiently depolarized or more positive enough so that it kicks out the magnesium blocker that is in the NMDA receptor, blocking the channel. So two things have to happen. The ligand, or glutamate, has to bind to the NMDA receptor, and the cell itself has to be sufficiently depolarized so that it can kick out the magnesium blocker. All right? Now, once the magnesium blocker is gone, then we allow another positive element in, calcium. Calcium is considered a secondary messenger. Okay? Now, once calcium enters the net negative neuron, it, of course, further depolarizes the cell, but it also starts a different type of cascade. Okay? Now, calcium, think of it as an activator of sorts, or maybe think of it as, say, it has an adhesive element that can stick to something and peel back the Velcro, exposing a segment of another downstream element and activate it. It allows this element to stick to something else and form another type of cascade. So one of those cascades, calcium can interact with there's adenylene cyclase. There's a mechanism where calcium can interact with adenylene cyclase and cyclic AMP, and ATP and adenylene cyclase. They have this interaction where ATP is adenosine triphosphate. Okay, and you have adenylate cyclase and adenosine triphosphate. All right, when the two interact, it becomes cyclic AMP, adenosine monophosphate. So what was once 3 triphosphate becomes 1 monophosphate. Okay, now once this new downstream element gets activated, it can go and activate something else called a protein kinase A, for example. Think of adhering, peeling back the Velcro, you expose an element of the other downstream element that can then attach to something else. So the pKa will then translocate, will move into the nucleus of the cell. Now I can get into the specifics of it, but I don't think it's necessary. But once it's inside the cell, it can start a DNA transcription to RNA translation mechanism. The DNA is transcribed to RNA. The RNA is translated into a particular protein. The particular protein that it gets translated into is another AMPA receptor, which then migrates to the top. Let's, for the sake of simplicity, let's say it goes next to the other AMPA receptor that is a channel for the sodium to come in, which depolarizes the cell, which kind of starts the whole process. So now what was one becomes two AMPA receptors. And of course, another glutamate combined to that one, letting in more sodium. Okay. Now there's another target that glutamate binds to. All right. That target is called a G protein, a heterotrimeric G protein coupling receptor. It sounds very complicated, but essentially, hetero meaning tri meaning three, meric G protein coupling has three subunits that once it's bound to by the ligand, which is glutamate, the alpha subunit of the hetero-trimeric G protein coupling receptor disassociates. And that starts affecting other downstream elements, which ends in the result of protein synthesis by the way of NAMDA, AMPA, and carrier proteins, which help migrate these proteins back to the surface so that more glutamate can bind to them. Okay, that's the basics of learning and memory, right? Now, there's a mechanism within us that will facilitate more glutamate release, which will in turn lead to more binding sites for that excess glutamate, which will translate into more connections regarding a specific memory or experience that you have in life. Think of it as extra resources. So say in the first example, you learn a new memory. I explained the 3 different types of binding locations for the glutamate. Think of it as a channel towards accessing a certain memory or experience, but you don't access it through a straw. It's not a strong stream, okay, because it's not many synaptic connections. Let's say it's 3 for a typical learning experience. It's a straw. You can access it, you kind of have to work for it. It doesn't come as fast as if you had, say, a deluge, a flow, a deluge of information back and forth, something that you can recall at any given moment, at any time, because these are the memories that we call them core memories. Like, so you had a favorite birthday party, or maybe even something traumatic. We all have had these experiences. They're unfortunate, but they are part of our evolution if we can find a way to think past them. All right, so when you have these moments, these core memories, the reason they become core memories, because at the moment of their inception, you've had many more resources, many more glutamate, much more glutamate to bind to the 3 locations that I mentioned before. All right, so, well, how does that happen? Well, adrenaline, also known as epinephrine. Epinephrine gets released when you are excited or scared, or there's many mechanisms that can lead to the release of epinephrine. Now, when I heard this process and I started to understand, I started to get excited. Well, what you're telling me is that if I can get excited about learning, about new experiences, about new people, you're telling me that I can give my brain access to additional resources so that what was typically be 3 synaptic connections, but with all these extra glutamate resources of glutamate, that could be 3,000 synaptic connections. What was once a straw becomes a deluge of access and information at your fingertips. If you can teach yourself and train yourself to get excited about learning new information, meeting new people, having new experiences. Everything will feel much more valuable to you because you're locking in many more of your experiences that will otherwise be forgotten as soon as the next form of, disruption in any kind of new experience or see comes in. You give it a chance. The new memories are more prone to disruption at their inception. If you just read something and then you hear another deluge of information from somewhere else, it's very likely that you're going to forget what you just read or learned because you haven't given your brain a chance to lock that specific memory in. You lock it in by thinking about it more. What was once a straw becomes a deluge. The more you try to access certain information, the more you try to think about it, the faster you're able to retrieve it, the more that you'll remember it. And when you sleep, the brain will replay said events in your mind when you sleep. That's how you lock in more information. So I'm going to wrap this up kind of soon. So what is the mechanism? You have an adrenaline release from the adrenal medulla. Think of it in the core midsection area. Epinephrine in its hormonal form is too large to pass the blood-brain barrier. It can't get through. But our body has a mechanism that can transfer that signal to where it needs to go so that the signal, that epinephrine, that adrenaline release can make its way to the brain, where the magic happens, right? That's why the brain is so phenomenal. So that mechanism is the epinephrine, it will bind to adrenergic receptors on the vagus nerve. Okay, that begins a cascade that winds up. So the vagus nerve, then we get to the brain stem. We're talking the solitary tract nuclei. Okay, that signal gets transmitted to the locus coeruleus. I always have trouble saying it. Now, the locus coeruleus then releases norepinephrine. Okay, the hormonal neurotransmitter equivalent to epinephrine, norepinephrine. So when that norepinephrine is released, it gets sent to the basolateral amygdala. The basolateral amygdala, think of it as an enhancer, like an emotional enhancer or a moment enhancer. The basolateral amygdala, or the BLA, is what will release all this excess glutamate, which has 3 binding sites that I mentioned before. More resources, more synaptic connections, more protein synthesis. What was once a straw becomes a deluge of access to whatever memory or information you want it to be. If you can, hopefully I did a good job of explaining one of life's great cheat codes to just being dope, remembering everything, caring more about people and your experiences. If you can walk around with that excitement, the people that you interact with, they're going to feel your presence. They're going to feel how much you care because they're going to feel how excited you are to speak to them. Okay? And when it comes to learning, if you can find a way to get excited about learning new material, you're going to give yourself much more resources at the moment of inception of these memories when you're reading this book, because you have all the extra resources you could ever want. What was 3 becomes 3,000. What was once a straw becomes a deluge. Now, if you can really understand and apply what I just told you, I really believe that it will change many things about your life, if you choose to believe it. That's up to you. I believe it. It's worked for me. I apply what I learn in these classes every day, and I teach it to my daughter, but not verbally. There's some things that I teach her, I want her to infer. There's explicit communication, and then there's implicit communication. I try to communicate on both levels because there's 2 different types of learning. You're receiving 2 simultaneous yet different types of input. if the presenter is communicating on both levels. You're more likely to lock in this information. And it's from the very beginning, since I started, there is the explicit things that I've been telling everyone, that I've been sharing. But there's so much more that can be implied from the message that I am saying. Every video, there's so much more. If you really think and look into it, you can apply it to many different scenarios and situations in your life. So, like I said in the beginning, this is probably, if you understand and really get what I'm saying, this will change your life. And I'm not trying to sell anything. This is information that I know and I've applied, and it's changed my life. It's changed my daughter's life. Everyone can feel it. That's why I leave a trail everywhere I go. These are some of the reasons why. And also, it kind of leads to the things I've been saying since the beginning. The reason I think about dope stuff and not dumb stuff, because they only have so much capacity for information. I don't want to lock in the dumb stuff. I really want to lock in the dope stuff. Okay? Because I understand the underlying mechanism. I know why and how it works. And I've seen the results. So yeah, that's all I got. I got to go get my daughter. Hope I won't be late. But yeah, just stop thinking about dumb stuff. Start thinking about dope stuff.